A new Maritime Incident File has surfaced. If you appreciate these types of mermaid stories, take a short break to like and subscribe. Either way, enjoy.
The BODYCAM footage that you are about to hear described has never been officially released. It was recorded on the morning of September 14th, 2021, approximately 19 nautical miles southeast of Key West, Florida, in waters where the Atlantic meets the Gulf Stream and the ocean floor drops away into depths that have never been fully mapped. The camera belonged to Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Delgado, a 7-year veteran of Coast Guard Station Key West who had responded to dozens of distress calls in his career and thought he had seen everything the sea could throw at a man. He was wrong. What his BODYCAM captured that morning, in the flooded compartments of a luxury yacht called Meridian's Grace, would end 3 careers, trigger a classified investigation that has never been acknowledged, and leave one woman so shattered by what she witnessed that she has not spoken publicly in the 3 years since. The footage shows the bodies of 6 people, all of them dead from wounds that no marine animal on record could have inflicted. It shows seawater flooding through hatches that had been opened from the inside, as if the crew had invited the ocean to come aboard. It shows claw marks gouged into teak and fiberglass, patterns of violence that forensic experts could not explain. And in one flooded cabin, in water up to Delgado's chest, it shows something that should not exist. Something pale and wrong and very much alive. Something that looked at the camera with eyes like black mirrors and smiled with rows of teeth that belonged in nightmares, not in the warm blue waters of the Florida Keys. The official report states that Meridian's Grace was lost due to mechanical failure and that all souls aboard perished in the accident. The official report is a lie. Only one passenger survived that night, a 62-year-old woman named Victoria Ames, who was found locked in the master cabin, her fingernails torn and bloody from clawing at the door, her voice reduced to a whisper that repeated the same words over and over again. She sang to them, Victoria said, when they finally coaxed her out into the light. They opened the hatches themselves. This is what really happened aboard Meridian's Grace. This is the testimony that was never allowed to reach the public record. And this is the footage that someone, somewhere, decided the world was finally ready to see. The Meridian's Grace was a 58-foot Hatteras motor yacht, built in 1998 and lovingly maintained by a succession of owners who understood that a vessel of her quality deserved respect. She had twin diesel engines capable of pushing her through moderate seas at 18 knots, a flying bridge that offered commanding views in all directions, and interior accommodations that could sleep 8 in comfort that most people never experience on land, let alone at sea. Her current owner was Richard Ames, a 66-year-old commercial real estate developer from Coral Gables who had made his fortune building strip malls across South Florida and who had purchased the yacht 3 years earlier as a retirement gift to himself. Richard loved that boat more than he loved most people, and those who knew him understood that this was not entirely a joke. The voyage that would end his life began as a celebration. His son Thomas, 32 years old, and finally showing signs of settling down, had announced his engagement to a young woman named Chloe Bennett, and Richard had insisted on marking the occasion with a 4-day cruise through the Florida Keys. They would leave from Key West, motor out to the remote anchorages that Richard had discovered over years of exploring these waters, and spend long days swimming and fishing and drinking expensive wine, while the world and its problems faded to insignificance on the horizon. It was supposed to be perfect. The weather forecast called for calm seas and light winds. The boat was provisioned with enough food and drink to last a week. The crew was experienced and professional, led by Captain Daniel Vasquez, a 58-year-old Cuban-American who had been running charter vessels in these waters for 3 decades and who knew every reef, every current, every moody shift in the weather that the Keys could produce. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that something had moved into these waters in recent weeks. Something ancient, something hungry, something that had learned over centuries beyond counting, exactly how to call sailors to their deaths. They departed Key West Marina at 0930 on the morning of September 12th, motoring out through the Northwest Channel under skies so blue and perfect that several of the passengers commented on how the day felt like a postcard come to life. Victoria Ames stood on the aft deck with a glass of champagne in her hand, watching the famous skyline of Key West grow smaller behind them, and she remembered feeling a contentment so complete that it almost frightened her. 62 years old, married to the same man for 38 of them, watching her son begin the same journey with a woman who seemed to genuinely love him. Life, Victoria thought, did not get better than this. Captain Vasquez plotted a course southeast, toward a small cluster of uninhabited islands where the snorkeling was spectacular and other boats rarely ventured. It was a spot he had discovered 15 years ago and had shared with only his most trusted clients. A secret anchorage where the water was so clear you could see the bottom at 40 feet, and the fish were so unaccustomed to humans that they would swim right up to investigate your mask. The first day passed in exactly the kind of lazy perfection that Richard Ames had promised. They anchored in the lee of a sandy key and spent the afternoon in the water, marveling at the coral formations and the rainbow clouds of tropical fish that moved through them like living jewelry. Elena Cordova, the yacht's chef, prepared a dinner of fresh-caught grouper and key lime pie that drew genuine applause from everyone at the table. They watched the sun set in colors that seemed too vivid to be real, and then they sat on the deck drinking wine and telling stories until the stars came out in numbers that city dwellers never get to see. By 2200, everyone had retired to their cabins, full and happy and completely unaware that they were being watched. That they had been watched since the moment they dropped anchor. That somewhere in the dark water beneath the hull, something was waiting for them to fall asleep. The first sound came at 0217 on the morning of September 13th. Thomas Ames would later tell investigators, in the brief window before he was silenced, that he had been dreaming of his childhood when something pulled him back to consciousness. Not a loud noise, not an alarm or a crash or anything that would normally wake a sleeping man. It was music, faint and strange and impossibly beautiful, drifting across the water from somewhere in the darkness beyond the boat. He lay in his bunk listening to it, trying to identify what he was hearing, and found that he could not. It was not a recording. It was not another vessel playing songs across the anchorage. It was a voice, he realized. A woman's voice, singing without words in a melody that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and settle somewhere deeper, somewhere in his chest, somewhere in the oldest parts of his brain where language had not yet been invented. He wanted to get up and find the source of that sound. He wanted to go to it. The urge was so strong that he had actually swung his legs out of the bunk before Chloe's hand closed around his wrist. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Her voice broke whatever spell had been forming, and Thomas blinked, suddenly aware of how strange his behavior must look. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, in the dark, preparing to leave the cabin in nothing but his underwear to chase a sound that was probably just some weird acoustic echo off the water. "Yeah," he said. "Probably someone on another boat." "There are no other boats," Chloe said. She was right. They had seen no one else all day. The anchorage was empty except for them. Thomas lay back down, pulling Chloe close, and told himself that there had to be a rational explanation. Sound carried strangely over water. Everyone knew that. Some fishing vessel miles away, some party on a distant quay, the acoustics of the ocean playing tricks on tired minds. He told himself these things. He almost believed them. But the singing continued for another hour, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost like language, almost like meaning, before finally fading into silence sometime around 0330. When Thomas finally slept again, he dreamed of drowning. He dreamed of sinking through warm water towards something pale that waited below. He dreamed of arms reaching up to pull him down. And when he woke at dawn, He could not shake the feeling that the dream had not been a dream at all, but a promise. The second day began with an unease that no one wanted to acknowledge. Victoria Ames noticed that her husband seemed distracted at breakfast, pushing his eggs around his plate and staring out the windows at the water with an expression she had never seen on his face before. When she asked if something was wrong, he said he had not slept well. Bad dreams, nothing to worry about. Captain Vasquez reported that the yacht's electrical system had experienced some anomalies overnight. Nothing serious, but he wanted to run diagnostics before they moved to the next anchorage. First mate Marcus Webb, a young man with sun-bleached hair and the perpetual tan of someone who lived his life on the water, mentioned that he had heard something strange around 0300. Music, maybe. Voices. He could not be sure. Chef Elena crossed herself when she heard this and said nothing, but Victoria noticed that her hands were trembling when she poured the coffee. The morning passed slowly. The group went snorkeling again, but the magic of the previous day seemed to have evaporated. The fish were there. The coral was just as beautiful, but everyone kept finding themselves looking out into the deeper water, into the blue darkness where the reef dropped away into the abyss, as if expecting to see something looking back. At 1400, Captain Vasquez announced that he was cutting the trip short. The electrical issues were more serious than he had initially thought, he explained. Better to head back to Key West and have the systems properly checked than to risk being stranded out here if something failed. Richard Ames, normally a man who argued every point and insisted on getting his money's worth, simply nodded. He looked relieved. They all looked relieved. The decision to leave was unanimous and immediate, and within 30 minutes, Meridian's Grace had weighed anchor and was heading northwest toward Key West at her maximum cruising speed. They were 40 minutes from the safety of the harbor when the port engine died. Then the starboard. Then the electronics. One by one, every system on the yacht shut down, leaving them drifting in silence on a sea that had suddenly become as flat and still as a mirror. No wind, no waves. No sound at all, except the gentle slap of water against the hull. Captain Vasquez tried the radio. Dead. He tried the satellite phone. Dead. He tried the emergency beacon. Dead. Every piece of equipment that might have called for help had simply stopped working, as if the yacht had been wrapped in some invisible field that swallowed electricity whole. They were alone, stranded, and the sun was beginning to set. The singing began again in 2019, while the last red light of sunset was still bleeding across the western horizon. This time, everyone heard it. This time, no one could pretend it was a distant party or an acoustic illusion or anything other than what it was. A voice, a woman's voice, rising from the water somewhere off the port bow, singing in a language that had never been spoken by human tongues. The melody was different now, less beautiful, more insistent. It pushed into their heads, like fingers pressing against the inside of their skulls, and it brought with it an urge that was almost impossible to resist. Go to her. Find her. She is waiting for you. She has always been waiting for you. Richard Ames was the first to move toward the rail. His wife screamed his name, but he did not seem to hear her. His eyes were fixed on something in the water, something that Victoria could not see from where she stood, and his face wore an expression of absolute peace. He was smiling. He was smiling like a man who has finally found what he has been searching for his entire life. Marcus Webb tackled him before he could climb over the gunwale, and the impact seemed to break whatever hold the song had on Richard's mind. He blinked, confused, staring at the young first mate as if he had no idea how he had gotten there or what he had been about to do. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I was going to jump. I was going to jump in. The singing stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the ragged breathing of 7 people who had just witnessed something that defied every rational explanation they could construct. Then Captain Vasquez pointed at the water and said, in a voice that did not sound like his own, "There's something down there." They crowded to the rail, all of them. and looked down into water that should have been black with night, but was instead illuminated by a pale glow that seemed to come from below. And in that glow, perhaps 30 feet down, something looked back at them. A face, a woman's face, if women had skin the color of dead flesh and eyes like pools of oil and mouths that stretched too wide and held too many teeth. She was smiling at them. The same smile that had been on Richard's face moments before. The same terrible, peaceful, welcoming smile. Then she opened her mouth, and the singing began again. The first to go was Marcus Webb, the young first mate who had saved Richard Ames from going over the rail just minutes before, was now walking toward the bow hatch with the steady, unhurried gait of a sleepwalker. Victoria screamed at him to stop. Chloe grabbed his arm, tried to physically restrain him. He shook her off without even looking at her, his eyes fixed on something that only he could see, and continued toward the hatch that led to the forward compartment. He opened it. He descended the ladder. And then he opened the seacock at the bottom of the yacht, the valve that allowed ocean water to flood in for cooling the engines, and he opened it all the way. By the time they understood what was happening, water was already pouring into the bow. Captain Vasquez ran to close the valve, but the singing had found him now, had wrapped around his mind like the tentacles of some deep-sea creature, and halfway down the ladder he simply stopped. He stood there in the rising water, up to his knees, then his waist, then his chest, and he smiled. He was still smiling when something in the water grabbed his legs and pulled him under. His body was found the next morning with wounds that the medical examiner described as inconsistent with any known marine predator. The official report blamed a shark attack. The official report did not mention that his expression, frozen in death, was one of perfect contentment, as if dying had been exactly what he wanted. The next hour was chaos. Elena Cordova locked herself in the galley, praying in rapid Spanish, her voice rising to compete with the singing that now seemed to come from everywhere, from the water, from the walls, from inside their own heads. Thomas Ames fought the song longer than anyone. He barricaded himself in the salon with Chloe and his parents, pushing furniture against the doors, screaming at everyone to cover their ears, to not listen, to think about anything else. But the song was patient. The song was old. The song had been calling sailors to their deaths since before the first humans carved the first canoe, and it knew exactly how to find the cracks in a human mind and slip inside. Chloe was next. She stood up in the middle of Thomas's desperate speech, walked calmly to the sliding door that led to the aft deck, and opened it. Thomas grabbed her, held her, begged her to stay with him. She turned to look at him with eyes that were no longer entirely her own. "Can't you hear her?" Chloe said. "She's so beautiful. She just wants us to come home." Then she twisted free and ran for the stern. Thomas ran after her. Richard ran after both of them. Victoria, alone in the salon, heard splashing. She heard screaming. She heard sounds that might have been laughter, or might have been something else entirely. Sounds that were wet and hungry and wrong. And then she heard nothing at all. The silence was worse. Victoria did not go to the door. She did not look out the window. She crawled to the master cabin, locked the door behind her, wedged herself into the closet, and covered her ears with both hands. The singing continued. Hours passed. She heard footsteps on the deck above her. She heard something heavy being dragged. She heard splashing, again and again, as if bodies were being dropped into the water, one by one. And once, just once, she heard something tap against the cabin door. 3 slow knocks. Then a voice, a woman's voice, a voice that sounded like her own mother, who had been dead for 20 years, saying, "Victoria, come out, sweetheart. Everyone's waiting for you. Everyone's so happy. Don't you want to be happy too?" Victoria pressed her hands harder against her ears. She pressed until she thought her skull would crack. She stayed in that closet, in the dark, for 7 more hours. She did not open her eyes until she heard the helicopter. Coast Guard Station Key West received the automated distress signal at 0523 on September 14th. The EPIRB aboard Meridian's Grace had finally managed to transmit a location burst, despite the failures of every other electronic system, and the response was immediate. A helicopter was dispatched within minutes, followed by a 45-foot response boat carrying Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Delgado and a 5-person boarding team. They found the yacht drifting in a light current approximately 19 nautical miles southeast of Key West. She was riding low in the water, clearly taking on flooding somewhere below the waterline, and there was no sign of movement on deck. The helicopter crew reported seeing what appeared to be damage to the aft section, damage that did not match any collision or grounding pattern they had ever encountered. It looked, the pilot would later say in testimony that was subsequently classified, like something had been climbing aboard. Like something with claws. Delgado's team reached the yacht at 0547. His BODYCAM was activated before he climbed the boarding ladder, and it remained recording for the next 43 minutes. What it captured in that time would become the most closely guarded piece of evidence in Coast Guard history. The deck of Meridian's Grace was covered in blood. Not splashes or drops, but streaks, as if bodies had been dragged from multiple locations toward the stern. The teak decking bore deep gouges, claw marks in parallel sets of 4, carved into wood that should have resisted any blade. The sliding door to the salon had been torn from its track. The furniture inside was overturned, smashed, reduced to kindling in what must have been a desperate struggle. Delgado swept the upper deck first, finding no survivors and no bodies. He noted, in a voice that was admirably calm given the circumstances, that the damage pattern suggested multiple attackers, that the claw marks varied slightly in spacing, as if made by different individuals, and that the quantity of blood indicated casualties that they had not yet located. He did not speculate about what kind of creature could leave such marks. He did not have to. The marks spoke for themselves. The team moved below, into compartments that were knee-deep in seawater and getting deeper by the minute. They found the first body in the forward cabin, floating face down in the flood. Marcus Webb, identified by the name sewn onto his uniform. His expression was peaceful, almost blissful. His throat had been torn out. Captain Vasquez was found in the engine compartment, tangled in the machinery, wounds covering his arms and chest that looked like defensive injuries sustained while fighting off something with claws and teeth. His expression was the same as Webb's, peaceful, happy, as if dying had been a gift. Elena Cordova was in the galley, the door still locked from the inside. She had not died from the wounds that covered her body. She had died from her own hand, a knife from her own kitchen buried in her chest. Her expression was not peaceful. Her expression was terror, absolute and infinite terror, as if she had seen something so horrible that death by her own hand was preferable to whatever else was coming. They found Richard Ames and Thomas Ains on the aft deck, in a section that was partially submerged as the yacht continued to settle. Father and son, lying side by side, their hands almost touching. They had been killed by wounds that the medical examiner would struggle to describe. Wounds that suggested teeth and claws, and a savagery that went beyond predation into something that looked almost like ritual. Chloe Bennett was never found. Her body was not on the yacht. It was not recovered from the surrounding waters, despite an extensive search. She simply vanished, taken by whatever had come aboard that night, carried away to depths where human eyes would never find her. Delgado's team had accounted for 6 of the 7 souls aboard when they heard the sound from the master cabin. A tapping, weak but rhythmic. Someone was still alive. They forced the door, found the closet, found Victoria Ames wedged into the smallest possible space, with her hands still pressed against her ears and her eyes squeezed shut. She was breathing. She was alive. And she was saying something over and over, in a voice that had been rubbed raw by hours of screaming. She sang to them. They opened the hatches themselves. She sang to them. They opened the hatches themselves. Delgado tried to coax her out. He told her she was safe, that help had arrived, that everything was going to be okay. Victoria opened her eyes, looked directly at his BODYCAM, and said, "You need to leave. Now. She's still here. She's still on the boat." Delgado asked who she was talking about. Victoria's answer made no sense at the time. "The singer," she said. "The one in the water. She came aboard. She's still in the water. In the boat. She never left." Delgado looked down at the water sloshing around his ankles. He looked at the flooded compartments that his team had not yet searched. And he felt, for the first time in his career, something very close to fear. The footage of what happened next has been viewed by fewer than 24 people. Most of them have signed documents that prevent them from ever discussing what they saw. The few who have spoken, anonymously and in fragments, describe images that do not match any known species of marine life. Delgado descended into the yacht's lower deck, into a flooded compartment where the water had risen to chest height and debris floated on the surface like the aftermath of a disaster. His flashlight beam cut through the murky water, illuminating broken furniture, floating cushions, the scattered remnants of a vacation that had become a slaughterhouse. He was looking for additional survivors. He was looking for bodies. What he found was something else. She was in the corner of the compartment, floating in the water, her back pressed against the bulkhead as if she had been waiting for him. The BODYCAM captured her clearly, too clearly. A female form, humanoid, but wrong in ways that the brain struggles to process. Skin the color of a 3-day-old corpse, gray-white and slightly luminescent in the flashlight's beam. Hair that drifted around her head like a dark halo, tangled with seaweed and what might have been strands of human tissue. A torso covered in scales that caught the light like mother of pearl, organic and horrible and somehow beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. And below the waist, where legs should have been, a tail. Silver gray, muscular, ending in fins that were ragged and torn like battle flags that had seen too many wars. She was watching him. Her eyes were black, completely black, reflecting no light from his flashlight, absorbing it like holes punched through reality into some darker dimension. Her mouth was open slightly, and he could see the teeth. Rows of them, needle-sharp, too many to count, arranged in a mouth that had not evolved to eat fish or seaweed or any normal prey. That mouth had evolved to eat people. The BODYCAM audio captured Delgado's sharp intake of breath. It captured the splash as he stumbled backward. It captured the sound she made in response, a sound that might have been laughter or might have been something older, something that predated human understanding of laughter or joy or any emotion at all. And then she moved, fast, faster than anything her size should have been able to move in water. She closed the distance between them in a fraction of a second, and for one terrible moment, her face filled the frame. Those black eyes, those endless teeth, that smile that was not a smile, but a promise of something worse than death. The BODYCAM captured everything. It captured Delgado screaming for his team. It captured the splash and chaos as he retreated up the ladder. It captured the sound of something large moving through the water behind him, pursuing, gaining. And it captured, in the final frames before Delgado burst onto the deck and into daylight, the sight of her hand, webbed fingers ending in claws, reaching up through the water toward his ankle. She missed. By inches, she missed. Delgado made it to the deck. His team pulled him aboard the response boat. They left the yacht where it floated, abandoned it to the sea and whatever creature had claimed it, and they did not look back. 20 minutes later, Meridian's grace slipped beneath the surface and was gone. The creature went with her. Or perhaps she simply went home. The investigation that followed was unlike anything the Coast Guard had ever conducted. Within hours of Delgado's team returning to station, personnel from agencies that were not identified arrived in Key West and took control. The BODYCAM footage was seized. All written reports were confiscated. Every member of the boarding team was interviewed separately, for hours, by people who asked questions that seemed designed to make them doubt what they had seen. Are you sure it wasn't a manatee? Are you sure it wasn't a large fish? Are you sure you weren't experiencing stress-related hallucinations? Delgado insisted on what he had seen. He described the creature in detail. He demanded that the footage be preserved as evidence of something unprecedented, something that required scientific investigation, something that the world needed to know about. His insistence earned him a medical discharge 3 months later. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the paperwork said. Unfit for continued service. His pension was preserved. His silence was purchased. The official report on the loss of Meridian's grace attributed the incident to mechanical failure exacerbated by severe weather. There was no severe weather that night. The report stated that all 7 souls aboard perished when the yacht sank. Victoria Ames was still very much alive. The report made no mention of the BODYCAM footage, the claw marks, the wounds that did not match any known predator, or the 6 bodies that were recovered from the water in the days that followed, each of them bearing injuries that the medical examiner privately described as impossible. The truth was buried. The evidence was classified. And the creature that had turned a family celebration into a massacre was never officially acknowledged to exist. Victoria Ames spent 3 months in a private psychiatric facility following her rescue. The official diagnosis was acute stress reaction with psychotic features. The unofficial diagnosis, shared among staff members who were troubled by what she told them, was that she had witnessed something that human psychology was not designed to process. She told them about the singing. She told them how it had wormed into the minds of everyone aboard, how it had turned her husband and son into willing victims who walked toward their own deaths with smiles on their faces. She told them about the creature she had glimpsed through the salon window in the moments before she barricaded herself in the master cabin. A woman, she said. A woman made of nightmares, climbing over the stern rail with movements that were too fluid to be human. Water streaming from a body that belonged in the deepest trenches of the ocean, not on the deck of a pleasure yacht in the Florida Keys. She told them about the voice that had called to her through the cabin door. Her mother's voice. Her dead mother's voice, speaking words of comfort that were somehow more terrifying than any threat. The psychiatrists wrote in their notes that Victoria was experiencing elaborate confabulation to cope with traumatic loss. They did not believe her. They could not believe her. To believe her would be to accept that the world contained things that medical textbooks did not cover and scientific journals did not acknowledge. Victoria stopped talking about what she had seen. She learned to tell the doctors what they wanted to hear. She was discharged after 90 days, officially recovered, officially ready to return to normal life. She has not set foot on a boat since. She has not visited the ocean since. She lives now in a house in Colorado, as far from salt water as she could get. And on the rare occasions when she speaks about her husband and son, she tells the story that the official report constructed for her. Mechanical failure, severe weather, a tragic accident. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind makes sounds that might be music, Victoria Ames covers her ears. And sometimes, in dreams, she still hears the singing. Petty Officer Ryan Delgado was not the only witness to what happened aboard Meridian's Grace. In the weeks and months that followed the incident, other stories began to surface. Fishermen who worked the waters around the Florida Keys, who had been working those waters for decades, started to speak among themselves about things they had seen and dismissed, things they had heard and ignored, shapes in the water that were not dolphins, songs on the wind that had no source, catches that came up empty from grounds that had always been productive, as if something had moved into the territory and driven the fish away. One shrimper, a man in his 70s who had been fishing the Gulf since he was a teenager, told a story about a night in 1987 when his entire crew had nearly walked off the boat into the water, one by one, before the singing suddenly stopped and they came back to their senses. He had never told anyone before. He had not wanted to be thought crazy. But after Meridian's grace, after the whispered rumors about what the Coast Guard had really found on that yacht, he decided that silence was no longer serving anyone. These creatures, whatever they are, have always been here. They have been in these waters since before there were maps to chart them. They have been taking sailors since the first wooden ships ventured out from shore. And the only reason we do not know about them, the only reason they remain in the realm of legend and myth, is because they do not leave survivors. Victoria Ames survived because she did not listen, because she covered her ears and closed her eyes and refused to open that cabin door no matter what voice called to her from the other side. She survived because something in her, some stubborn core of will, was stronger than the song. But she was the exception. She was one among millions who have gone to sea and not returned, their disappearances attributed to storms and accidents and the general cruelty of the ocean. How many of them heard the singing in their final moments? How many of them smiled as they went over the rail? How many of them are still down there, in the dark places where sunlight never reaches, keeping company with things that humanity has tried very hard to pretend do not exist? The BODYCAM footage from Meridian's grace was classified at the highest level and supposedly destroyed. But copies have a way of surviving. In 2024, 3 years after the incident, fragments of Delgado's recording began to appear on private servers and encrypted channels where people share things that the government does not want seen. We cannot verify the authenticity of everything that has surfaced. We cannot confirm which frames are original and which may have been altered. But we have spoken to people who have seen the unedited footage, people whose security clearances gave them access to files that do not officially exist, and their accounts are consistent. They describe exactly what Victoria Ames described. They describe exactly what Ryan Delgado reported before he was discharged. They describe a creature that should not exist in waters that millions of people swim in every year, hunting with a song that turns victims into willing participants in their own deaths. The official position remains that no such footage exists. The official position remains that Meridian's grace was lost in an accident. The official position remains that mermaids, sirens, whatever name you want to give them, are the inventions of lonely sailors and overactive imaginations. The official position is a lie. Victoria Ames knows the truth. Ryan Delgado knows the truth. And now, if you have listened this far, you know it too. They are out there. They have always been out there. And the only thing protecting us from them is the fact that most of us will never hear their song. Victoria Ames is 70 years old now. She lives alone in that house in Colorado, surrounded by mountains and pine trees and air that has never tasted salt. She does not give interviews. She does not respond to researchers or journalists or the occasional true believer who tracks down her address and shows up on her doorstep wanting to know what really happened. But once, about 2 years ago, she agreed to speak with someone who had lost their own family member at sea. A young woman whose father had vanished from his sailboat in the Caribbean, leaving no trace, no explanation, nothing but an empty vessel drifting on calm waters. Victoria spoke with her for 3 hours. She told her things she had never told the psychiatrists or the investigators or anyone else. She told her about the beauty of the song, how it had been the most exquisite thing she had ever heard, how some part of her still longed to hear it again, even though she knew what it meant. She told her about her husband's face in those final moments, the peace that had settled over him, the absolute certainty that he was going somewhere better. "I think they were happy," Victoria said. "At the end, I think the song gave them that, at least. A moment of perfect happiness before whatever came next." The young woman asked if that brought Victoria any comfort. Victoria thought about it for a long time. "No," she finally said, "because I know what gave them that happiness. I know what was waiting for them in the water. And happiness that comes from a monster is not really happiness at all. It's just another kind of death." She fell silent then, looking out the window at the mountains, at a landscape that could not have been more different from the warm blue waters where her family died. "I hear it sometimes," she admitted. The song. In my dreams, in the wind, in the sound of water running from a faucet. It never really stopped, you know. It's always there, at the edge of my hearing, waiting for me to give in. The young woman asked what kept her from giving in. Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Spite, she said. Pure spite. They took everything from me. My husband, my son, the future we were supposed to have together. And the only revenge I can have, the only way I can hurt them back, is to keep living, to keep being the one who got away, to bear her echo instead of letting it drown me. She looked at the young woman with eyes that had seen things no human should ever see. That's all we can do, Victoria said. Those of us who survive, we carry it with us. We bear the echo, and we hope that someday someone will listen. If you have seen something you cannot explain, something in the water that did not belong there, something that sang to you from the depths, I want to hear from you. Leave your story in the comments below. Share what you witnessed. You are not alone. You never were. There are others like you, people who have heard the song and lived to tell about it, people who carry the echo with them every day. Your story matters. Your testimony matters. Because the more of us who speak, the harder it becomes for them to pretend that these things do not exist. The harder it becomes to bury the truth. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe to Maritime Incident Files. There are more accounts from the deep, more footage that was never supposed to surface, more echoes that deserve to be heard. Stay safe out there. And if you ever hear singing on the water from a voice you do not recognize, do not listen. Cover your ears. Close your eyes. And whatever you do, do not go to her. The song is beautiful. The singer is not. This has been Maritime Incident Files, and this has been the one they tried to silence.